Okay, so here's our second stream of the morning. Hope you like the first one. We're going to maybe do a quick introduction again, because even in the first stream, people didn't know who we are, what we stood for. I'll just very briefly say I'm a Muslim. I do happiness classes that can benefit everybody. I talk about Islamic values that benefit everybody. You don't have to become a Muslim to benefit from them. I talk about big social issues as well as, environmental issues, economic issues, all the things that affect our world and hopefully make the world a better place. Dust, do you want to say something about yourself before we get started?
I'm a fundamental believer that democracy is the absolute way forward in life and the way we should be under a country or a world, which is supported by a constitution, a world constitution, which gives people human rights if they wish to engage in such a legal system about their right to be a human being in whatever country they are. That's where I come from.
Okay, cool. And so, as usual, I'd like to start. So, as I'm representing Islam, I always quote from the Holy Quran. The Quran is like a guidebook for Muslims, in fact, all of humanity, if they wish to listen to it. And because I didn't quite write down all my notes as I usually do, I'll paraphrase some verses of the Holy Quran that are relevant to this discussion about CO2 being good for global warming. Okay, so the first thing I'll mention is the first verse of every chapter of the Holy Quran, which basically it says, it's a very rough translation, is "In the name of God, the most gracious, the ever merciful," but it's a very weak translation. It doesn't represent the true meaning. The word Rahim and Rahman, the two words, the gracious, the merciful, what they really mean, the word Rahman, which is translated as gracious, means, thank you for ticking the timer, it means what the God who's given everything that we need. And Rahim, the second quality that follows on, is when we make use of those facilities in the world, that God rewards us. Okay, and both words, just to give you a better idea or to explain it better, are linked to the word womb. So just to give you a very quick picture of what I'm talking about, what I'm getting at is that we live in a world, anybody who studies the world will be amazed at how incredibly balanced and delicate this life support system we live in. We have the air being recycled for us. If none of these things happen, we would be dead very quickly. We live in literally a bubble. The atmosphere is incredibly thin and protected by force fields from the sun's, solar flares and all sorts of crazy things. So we are supported incredibly well, and any sort of reflection would make us realize that there is a God and is maintaining our life. Now, what has this got to do with CO2? There is another verse of the Holy Quran that talks about how God will provide us certain things and will create new things, new modes of transport. Okay, and those new modes of transport, for example, involve the combustion engine, including the use of oil, which emits CO2. Okay, so trying to put the picture together very quickly without getting too boring, what I'm saying is essentially that there are really not many accidents or we were given oil, is a short version. We were given oil to use to progress humanity, and that's actually very well known that we cannot just stop oil, as the Stop Oil movement says, because the poorer people who have not developed yet, the poorer countries that are not developed yet, they still need the oil as the most efficient, easy use of fuel to progress and develop their societies. This is well known. And so, in short, if we were supposed to use oil, and then we get all the CO2 that we've been told is terrible for us, but in reality, we can see the world is actually getting greener, more trees are growing. And in fact, when we get rid of all the propaganda, we realize, and I'm not saying we should just trash the planet either. Okay, we shouldn't just throw plastic everywhere and things like that. We shouldn't just make mess everywhere. We shouldn't put toxic things in the street. We should be kind to animals and eat less animals and things like that. We should have some more balance. But I'm just saying that the use of oil is not accidental. It has developed society. It's enabled us to do, have transport, move goods across the world more easily. So that sustains more life in a more, how do you say, if you are dependent on just resources in your local area, and then you had a family in your local tiny area, you would die really quickly. But because we're more connected, we can shift resources more easily, and therefore our lifespans are longer since the Industrial Revolution. So in short, what I'm saying is, if we get rid of the propaganda, we will quickly realize that this oil has just emitted more CO2 into the air that was trapped from the deaths of dinosaurs and vegetation millions of years ago. And we are all made out of carbon. Those animals were made out of carbon, and we have extracted that carbon, put it out in the air, and that is now being recycled to create more CO2 to support life. Okay, there was more life at the time of the dinosaurs, and there's far more CO2 at the time of the dinosaurs in the air to support that life. I'm just going to go through some statistics that a good friend of mine has put down. In prehistoric eras, CO2 levels were much higher during the eras of the Earth's history. During the Cambrian period, about 541 million years ago, there is evidence to suggest that carbon dioxide CO2 levels were significantly higher than they are today. The Cambrian explosion, which is when so many new creatures or animals are created, was a period of rapid diversification and evolution of complex life forms, including the appearance of many major animal groups. Maybe I'll read some of them. Basically, throughout all these dinosaur times that my friend has put for it, the CO2 levels were far higher, and it supported massive animals. And if the population grows, and as I think it will eventually after its current decline, CO2 is going to support the vegetation that's going to support us. Is there anything else? By increasing CO2 levels up to around 1,500 parts per molecule or something, I can't remember what it is, plant growth accelerates, and we can see this currently happening at the moment. Growers have observed up to 100% increase in growth speed. So basically, people actually use carbon dioxide in greenhouses to encourage the growth of plants. So we shouldn't see CO2 as some sort of lethal gas. That's not part of nature. Anyway, you go for it.
We've got a guest here. So
is it Josh?
Josh is materialized.
Hey Josh, good to see you. I think we've met, Josh. I vaguely remember seeing your face.
We certainly have.
Okay.
Do you want me to make my?
Do you feel? Yeah. You got to say about that?
Well, I mean, I do think that. The Earth's climate is always in a perpetual state of flux, and there have been times when, like, the oxygen concentration has been much higher in the atmosphere, like in the time of the dinosaurs. That's why you had, insects were larger because they could take in more oxygen and metabolize more and grow more, and essentially, their inefficient metabolisms was compensated for by the lack of oxygen. Anyway, I'm digressing. It was compensated for by the abundance of oxygen. I'm digressing a bit, but the point is, gas concentrations have never always remained constant. I mean, at one stage it was volcanic eruptions it still is, because they're an inherent part of the carbon cycle. But I do think that it's totally naive to say that burning all that oil has absolutely no consequences. I think that, inevitably the next ice age is likely due. which is likely to compensate for the abundance of CO2. But whether or not that will actually happen in time to spare us any further destruction is well, put it mildly, put it optimistically, is doubtful. But what I do think is that all this oil burning, it's not so much the presence of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, it's the rapid increase and the Earth's and the ecosystem's inability to adapt to it in time. If it was happening over a longer period of time at a slower rate, probably plants, animals, climate, weather systems, they would adapt and they would evolve to cope with it. But we are just dumping so much of it at such a rapid rate. It's a bit like, the analogy of when you turn up the volume gradually at a club, a nightclub, and people gradually get adjusted to it, okay, and they're sort of, they get into a rave. But if suddenly you put one song on at a low volume, then you put another one at a high volume, it might cause them quite a serious hearing damage because of the rapid increase in volume, and it scares them. It makes you jump. The point is, we are doing this so quickly. We are dumping all the CO2 so quickly. There is just not enough time for our ecosystem to adapt, which is why I think we need to not completely abandon carbon technology, but we do need to try and decelerate, ease off the throttle, and and find not so much alternatives, but as you would say, diversify our sources of energy, because there are just so many. But the point is, you don't want to be reliant on just one thing, because any one thing, whether it's oil or oil, is often is of course subject to natural factors like its limit, its finiteness. But solar power is subject to the sun's sunspots, cloud cover weather systems, all of those things. Nuclear power is subject to potentially disastrous consequences, as we saw in Chernobyl and Fukushima. So to be reliant on just one thing is really quite unreliable, and which is why I say we need to diversify it, keep oil in there and coal in there, but don't get overly hooked on it to the point that it's our main source of energy, because it's irresponsible, and it's excessively dependent.
Yeah, I think we need to respond to some of the things that you brought up there, Callie, which is that poor countries need oil to profit. If you are dependent on oil to grow your poor country, you add to the poverty of a country. The only reason why oil is sustainable is because of the amount of taxpayers' money given to oil companies to support them and what they do. Every minute, it's something like £13 million of the world's taxpayer is funding just for research. These horrible, disgusting, gross oil companies who lead to the majority of the wars that happen at the moment. And so if you care about poor countries and then with the same sentence add oil, that is an absolute oxymoron. In actual fact, oil companies make the poor countries dependent on their destructive, disgusting, amoral ways. Exploitation, capitalism profits from not only the wars that happen over oil, but obviously the oil itself. The world is not getting greener. Every single day, hundreds of acres are being chopped down in South Africa. I've almost finished. South America, sorry, and other parts of the world. The world is getting less and less. Just Google world maps over the last 50 years of the devastation of taking away green. Deforestation. There are clear maps, satellite maps, labeling just the horror, which is and it's again the catalyst. They're the ones there, and you get left-wing governments trying to stop this slaughter of the trees, which means we can no longer breathe, no longer recycle that air that you mentioned just a moment ago. Their trees are getting chopped down. I implore you to Google that satellite imagery of the last 50 years. And again, the only reason that we used oil has any value whatsoever, is because of the repression of the technologies of renewables done by the oil companies over the last 60 years. And they've known for the last 60 years, been told by their own scientists, how they're leading to the destruction of this whole planet by pumping out CO2, which the world can never cope with. And we have the fires. Just Google the fires across the world. How can you have, and of course, how can you have farming when there's such destabilization of environment? Farming is dependent on a stable ecosystem for farming to work. The rate of fire rages across Europe at the moment, heat waves across Europe, they destroy agriculture. And capitalism is sitting back, and they know exactly they've done each thing, each moment, each year, each decade. They've known they have deliberately contributed to this absolute horror. And there are no happy communities when you're in a heat wave. No happy communities when you can't have access to clean water because there's no rain systems has been disturbed so much that you only have a desert system now, and you're fighting over a barrel of water that's been pumped, been driven to your house, that your own neighbours are demanding all the water. It's an absolute perversion to think more CO2 isn't a devastation to humanity. But let's look at that. I mean, a lot of people that support CO2 and the oil companies, because they just don't care about humanity. They don't care about what they've done, these oil companies, and do each day in the pollution. Because it's not just CO2, it's horrific amount of pollution that they bring to this world that destroys children's lungs, destroys children's habitats, and the chemical industry, which is dependent on the oil industry, of course, to transfer it into petrol, oil, etc. They create horrific pollution themselves. And it just so happens you don't live next to a nuclear power station. So happens you don't live next to an oil refinery.
Sorry, can I just say that nuclear power stations aren't necessarily as devastating as oil. So long as the radioactive waste is kept secure, it's not necessary. It's not as bad. I mean, it's not good, but
I disagree with that. But
yes, okay.
We've still got 1 minute 50 seconds, unbelievably.
Yeah.
I'll pass over to you now so you can respond. You've got 2 minutes. I'm being very good on the clock this time.
Cool, good. No, lots of great, very important points I think you made, including Josh. Josh, is that all you wanted? You said everything you wanted to say because you put your hand up, but you were just going to correct about the nuclear thing.
Yeah. Oh, what was? Oh God, I forgot what the other one was actually.
But feel free to put your hand up like while I'm talking. I don't mind. You know, if it comes back to mind. Have you remembered it?
Well. What I was going to say is there were certain areas of the planet that are actually increasing in forestry, reforestation, like Costa Rica, like the Scandinavian countries, much of Europe. I don't think Russia so much because there's a lot of illegal timber going on in Siberia. But there are areas where it is increasing, but whether or not it compensates, I'm quite doubtful of that. You know.
I'll say just to add to that, the trees he's talking about are farm trees that are used for
cultivated.
It's a mono tree system where the Amazon jungle, what's unique about that is the diversity that's there. One thing I forgot to mention right now is history is going through the biggest extinction of species in the existence of the whole planet since the dinosaur.
Yeah, since the dinosaurs.
Since the dinosaur thing.
I think the biggest mass extinction was the one before the dinosaurs. It was just before the dinosaurs, actually. It wiped out them. Yeah. But I know we're digressing.
So,
I think these are all part of the story.
Doing that. Capitalism is doing that. They are the leaders. They have the wealth, and they decide where money's going to go into. And they decide you're going to become addicted to oil and never become addicted to recycles because you recycle. Wind turbines and a wave, etc. You can't make gross profit from that. And most importantly, you cannot kill the planet by using recyclable energy. You can't kill the planet. And the catalysts, their greatest passion and pleasure in this world is killing you, your community, and your religions, ironically, and the planet Earth that we live on and all have to share in.
Okay,
right.
Cool.
I actually, unbelievably,
click. Yeah.
Even though there's two of us, we've still had.
Oh, nice one.
You see that? You got 2 clicks.
Oh, really? Okay, good. Okay, so very briefly, I think Josh made an important point that he's saying that the environment is changing so rapidly that the ecosystem, ourselves included, don't have enough time to respond. I think that's a misunderstanding. Like, for example, the rise of the sea level rise is rising 3 millimeters every year. So it's actually it would take over 100 years for us to see a real change. And so that's often a misunderstanding that yes, we do have time to respond. Again, CO2 is not poisonous chemical. It's good for the environment. It grows things. We've seen an interesting comment here. Study has shown the increase in CO2 has increased plant and tree biomass that is equivalent to the size of Amazon. There are a lot of good points that you are making, that we have misused our environment and there's so many other bad things happening. So, for example, people are continuing wars through oil and things like that. These are things that we need to control as well. I'm not saying that everything to do with oil is good. We have misused it as well. Yeah, I think those are the main points. Yep.
Well, no one's ever gone to war over fighting over some wind, because that wind is all over the world. That's just common sense.
It is
sorry, you just reminded me. So Germany spent over 200 billion on renewable energies, and it couldn't sustain itself on renewable energies.
No,
Sorry,
I just need to say, just to inform your next point, Germany actually uses 25 times more coal than we do, 25 more times. Its per capita CO2 emission is actually higher than ours. Yeah,
that's right. Despite it investing so much in renewable energies. Now, Dust made an interesting point last time we talked about it last week, that Norway has managed to support itself through renewable energies. First of all, it got its money in through oil. Okay, so it's got billions and literally trillions in oil, and it has to support a very sparse population. So it's not the best example, but it's a good start. And I do support the investment in renewable energies because oil will run out. So yeah.
I think we should have a minute each to everyone has a minute just to conclude there.
Cool. We're concluding already. It's very good. Yeah.
It makes sense because we were so long on the last one.
Sure.
So I'll just take a minute. So basically, renewables technology was completely and deliberately repressed. And each moment now that society is going for, the exponential rate of energy being able to be captured by wind, sun is, as I said, it's exponential and growing all the time. And the wind is everywhere. And yes, there are concentrations of wind, and that means you just need to create electrical pipes to transmit it to areas that are not so lucky to have certain resources. But if we can create a world covered in oil pipes, we sure as hell can create a world covered in electrical pipes and batteries, which can therefore harness
wind turbines,
harness and push this energy to a point where it's renewable. Nuclear and coal are absolutely insane and only there because some rich kid needs to get richer. That's the only reason we're addicted to oil. Right. Do you want to have a minute as well?
Josh?
Yes. Well, just to conclude the point, in summation, I think I've already said this, but I'll say it again. We need to diversify our energy sources, our energy sources / resources. But more than anything, my point is we don't want to become over-reliant on one source, because we need redundancies, we need backups, we need reserve options. If one runs out or the others, due to a natural disaster becomes scarce, or because well, unfortunately, we have to accept that market forces will dictate the value of certain commodities and how much of one energy source we can purchase. But that's all the more reason to diversify it, And, just to touch on the socialism, socialism is, I'm not saying socialism is diversity, but socialism is not over-reliance on one resource, particularly if it is a commodifiable resource. Socialism is diversifying it so that you have contingency plans. Capitalism is casino economics, where you throw all your eggs into one basket. I know it's a little less crude than that, but capitalism is casino economics, where you throw all your eggs into one basket and hopefully the dice rolls on the face you want it to. So yeah, that's why I think it's important to diversify our resources.
Would you like to say a sentence about CO2 rising? Good, bad? We need to stop it.
We do need to slow it. Stop it is unrealistic because it's always going to be emitted into the atmosphere by natural processes. But
from man-made oil companies.
We have to certainly reduce it. I mean, completely stop it is, I don't know how feasible that is, but we certainly need to, absolutely 100% positively decelerate slacken our pace. Yeah.
Thank you. Khaled, you've got 1 minute, 30 seconds.
Sure. So first of all, to say there's a great conspiracy that everybody's supporting oil for no reason is not based on any facts. Well, not based on enough facts, because clearly our renewables are not meeting the demands of the world. So we have to question that fact. I think we just need to, rather than complain, just work on the technology. And just to kind of round off my point about CO2, currently, thank you very much. I think his name was Nazish, who produced this research for me. He said we're currently on 390 ppm in terms of CO2. Okay, and when we had far more life, huge animals spanning 100 meters in length, we were on, what have we got? About 1,500 parts per million. We've got a long way to grow. So the global warming was going to be good for plant life, in short.
Yes, plants use CO2. Human beings, mammals, and all other creatures that move use oxygen,
which plants recycle.
Which is going to be terrible for them, because burning means CO2, not oxygen. And trees have been cut down at a horrific rate.
Cool. You know what? I was just thinking, since we missed Josh earlier on when we were talking about communism.
Yeah, apologies for that.
No, it's okay. I was just thinking, the whole point of talking about communism, capitalism, all this kind of the struggle is like, how can we solve the problems we're suffering from at the moment? And right now we're talking about environmental damage of things. So I'm just remind Dust, if we could continue a little bit and gave it a little communist angle, like what would communism do differently to solve this problem? And just to kind of do a rebuttal on your point, Josh, against capitalism, you said in capitalism we throw all our eggs in one basket. That's not capitalism. Capitalism is you've got loads of people, loads of actors in the market, and they're all trying different things, and we vote for the thing that works best. Okay, with our money, we say we're going to give you money, therefore, because we think that works, this doesn't work, etc., etc. There is some sort of, it's not capitalism when the government decides everything. That's closer to what I would.
Yeah, but the thing is, sorry, just to cut across you, the government is often, like in the payroll of these oil companies. I mean, the number of former US presidents who have shares or stakes or associations with oil companies like OPEC, ExxonMobil. George W. Bush was in particular a notorious lobbyist. The thing is, you'll forget, you've got to remember that the government and these corporations, all right, it isn't pure capitalism, to be fair to you, actually. It's not pure capitalism, it's corporatism. But nevertheless, these companies and these governments, are in cahoots with one another. They're not.
No, you make a good point. I agree with you. I agree. We over focused on that particular resource, oil, because they've been lobbied. Because, like I said in our earlier discussion, the capitalism can go wrong because one of the problems with capitalism is you can buy more power.
Yeah, well,
which is
well, like, in my opinion, capitalism is inherently wrong. But anyway, yeah, no, it can go.
But what would be communism's solution? How would it
Well,
realistically
Justin, I
solve the
think
problem?
that's your. Oh, it's
But you're
okay.
the
Well,
Dust
I'm not a
made.
communist, though.
Oh,
I'm
so
not.
I thought you.
I'm not a communist. I'm a
Dust
socialist.
said the whole of the last stream was saying that you were the communist and you were the
No,
expert.
no. I'm a socialist. I'm a socialist.
My bad.
It's all right. Don't worry. Don't worry.
That's all right. So as a socialist, what would you say is a solution?
Well,
I
I
might
would
agree
say
even.
If we want to bring these companies under control and limit or cultivate their harmful activities, we need to nationalize them. That's what socialism. That's an inherent part of socialism: nationalization of industry. That way, we can regulate their activities so they're less harmful, but we can do so democratically, not dictatorially. If we have a democratically elected socialist government. Unfortunately, of course, because all these parties are funded for, lobbied by capitalists and corporatists, I mean, it's unfortunately that isn't that realistic at this present time. I mean, we tried to get socialism with Jeremy Corbyn, and of course, his own party, more so than the Tories ever did, because I think the Tories are actually more left-wing than Labour now. Ironically, his own party tried to sabotage them. So, but the point is, anyway, I'm digressing again. The point is, socialism.
Good.
Socialism means nationalisation of industry, and nationalisation means that you have a regulation on industry, whether it's harmful or not to the environment, and you can not so much curb its activities, but modify them and tailor them, essentially, adapt them to be less harmful. And I think, for example, like if you nationalised oil, I don't pretend to know much about the oil industry, but surely you could put like maximum quotas, minimum quotas on them. That you would also have to ensure that that you could also be better able to close any tax loopholes, because a lot of their stakeholders and shareholders live in offshore tax havens, as offshore as the oil, almost as offshore as the refineries they use, like oil rigs they use. You could also ensure, if you had, you could also impose, for example, like when they burn excess oil, you could ensure that all of their rigs, all of their fields have like the equivalent of catalytic converters that you get on cars, to ensure that a lot of the carbon is captured. Also, you could restrict their activities to ensure that they don't mine in a vulnerable part of the world, or a vulnerable part of the country or territory, like waters, nationally owned waters nationally controlled waters that you would control. That is one example of how socialism. It's not that socialism would stop all this climate change or stop the CO2 emissions or cap, but it could maybe not put a complete cap on them, but it can slow it down to the point where it's not so bad. And
Can I just make sure I understand your idea of socialism? Would there be any element of trading using money in your understanding of socialism? Would people be able to own their own
there's always going
shops
to be
and
trade.
factories?
Yeah,
Okay.
well, there's always going to be trade, and that's what I was saying about taxation. Because a lot of money laundering comes from just transferring money, passing it over into offshore bank accounts, and then another one, and then until it's really hard to trace. Now, if you have a nationally owned oil company, they would have to be fully accountable for their revenues, because they are a part of the government. I mean, whether or not you've got a trustworthy government who would fastidiously adhere to that, I don't know, but certainly, money laundering. And this is an important part of trade, because taxation comes from trade. It's generated by trading. Revenue is generated by what you trade. Hence why you get deficits and why you get surpluses. But the point is, in regards to trade, using this one particular, albeit generic paradigm, taxation, ensuring that all these tax loopholes are closed would be, intrinsic in, and vice versa in a nationalised oil company.
And just make a very clear point. What capitalists do is incentivizing by making gross profits out of particular actions that are destroying and murdering the planet. Nationalisation would take the profit out of killing the planet through oil use, through war, and that means these terrible, disgusting, gross, amoral actions which are happening, we won't be able to make profit out of it. And guess what? A lot of people that pursue profit will no longer go to these areas to make a quick buck. Oil companies are incentivized to destroy this planet, and they're not going to stop, and therefore they'll destroy anything that destroys that profit-making system, and nationalization would stop the profit of that, meaning that we can actually have a proper conversation in the real world about what energy creation systems we are going to create. Like you mentioned Tesla, they're doing an incredible job. Yes, it is a capitalist company, but it's actually got one of those rare things about it, humanity, which is an absolute exception to every other capitalist company in the top 100 on this planet.
So could you just repeat that point again, just so we understand? Because I think just one last time. Sorry, I just want to make sure I understand that point again.
Which bit?
About Tesla?
Yeah, exactly.
About what?
So you're saying Tesla is an exception, and it actually is good for the environment.
I've always said that Tesla is an anti-capitalist company. It hasn't got the memo that you're meant to be destroying the planet. It hasn't got that memo. It's got the memo instead of, oh, we're going to have free patents. All the patents on Tesla are free. It acts almost pure socialism within Tesla. It doesn't destroy the planet. Everything's free that it designs and develops. All the patents are free, and the profits are going back in, not to shareholders as such, but the majority of profits are going back to developing new technology and developments like solar panel, like
capital socialism, isn't it? Really.
Bingo.
Sorry, I was just a little bit.
Bingo.
I was a little bit.
Capitalist socialism.
Yeah,
which is what socialism basically is. You don't need the capitalist socialism to talk about socialism, but most people do need that as a frame. Socialism is development and enterprise, fundamentally.
Okay, so I would agree. I believe in capitalist socialism in some sense of the word. So to what extent do I believe in it? So in Islam, the resources of a country belong to the country. So it would be like what you're saying, Josh, I think, that the oil would be owned or nationalized,
by and for the people.
By the people. That doesn't mean they have to run everything, because they could outsource it to different companies who could possibly do it more efficiently than they can. So one of my problems with communism, or maybe some levels of socialism where they just nationalize things, is that it's very hard to get the right person to do the right job. With the capitalistic competitive system, you have different people saying we're the right people, and then they don't do it. Some people do it well, some people don't do it well, some people go out of business, some people stay in business.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So I believe I think maybe we're agreeing that there's a healthy midway between capitalism has its function of giving and spreading resource in a fairly good way, but you need some certain level of morality to control that, and some level of control. So you said, for example, nationalistic companies avoid loopholes and things like that. Actually, they might misuse money as well, because they might just be corrupt people. If you go to politicians,
no. Thing is, nationalization, there are no secrets from the companies. All companies keep secrets.
In utopia world, yes.
No, but nationalization means, by definition, free access to information. In a democracy, in a functioning democracy, you have access to information. So therefore, crimes cannot happen. That's not utopian. That's common sense.
That is utopian. That's utopian. Crimes cannot happen. There will always be good and bad people. Anyway, so I'm just saying that in the real world, those
real world.
These problems can easily persist if people are not particularly good. You can, as they say, power corrupts, right? So if you have a company that runs everything, and I don't think Josh is necessarily saying that, but we have to be careful about this. That if you have a company that runs everything in regards to, let's say, oil or trains or something, and you don't have any competition, that would corrupt people, and there'd be a sort of stagnation of technology as well, because they're not motivated to keep improving necessarily, unless they're particularly good people. So I think those are the main issues. So generally, I feel like I'm beginning to agree, at least with Josh, that there should be a middle way. You do need to have morality. Without morality, every system can go wrong. Yeah, that's it.
So just as I was saying a moment ago, in democracy, functioning democracy, you have access to freedom of information. That means when a crime does happen, you can instantly jump on it and create the legal system take approach. In capitalism, which has no interest in competition, no interest in who's the best for the job,
No interest in fair competition.
no interest in fair competition. It is purely a monopolistic enterprise. Is capitalism purely monopolistic? It owns all the companies, one group of people, and they decide that they're the best choice because they're the people that have all the money and who truth, facts, and other considerations of value are all out the window. And nationalisation again, the reason why you can actually report any crimes happening is because there is no secrets if it's truly nationalised. And where there's ever a secret, where everyone's telling you where not they're getting the secrets are, there's always a crime. That's why secrets happen in government capitalism, because they're ashamed of what you are and what you're doing.
Okay. I mean, there's lots of interesting comments. Maybe I'll whiz through them because I like the participation. So I will. So we've kind of gone into the socialism element of it. Socialism is diversity. Would you agree? Anybody?
I don't know.
I'm going to briefly whiz through quite a few comments.
I don't know if they're I don't know if they're mutually inclusive things, but they're not mutually exclusive. Like, well, I suppose they're mutually inclusive, but they're not interchangeable, like synonymous concepts. But certainly one fosters the other to a large extent. Yeah.
I've got, yes. You know what? I just realized, I think he meant a question mark because he says literally the opposite in the next comment. He says, in the real world, socialist economies seem to have the least amount of diversity in goods and services compared to the evil capitalists.
That's just ridiculous.
Well,
I mean, I would agree with him. I would agree with him if you have too much state control, then you're going to have less diversity. That's kind of almost by definition, isn't it? If you have everything nationalized, then you don't have diversity by definition, isn't that right?
No, that's
but socialism doesn't mean that every single business is nationalized. I mean, even in the Soviet Union, you had small scale businesses that are allowed to run independently. And that was that was like, that there was an element of localized capitalism, but it was still a socialist economy and there were also incentives for tradesmen, for, salesmen to produce their goods. And actually trading did flourish. It wasn't just the roaring 20s in the Western world because it was introduced in the 1920s, I think in 1921, but Lenin's new economic policy, while pragmatic, was still a good balance between socialism and capitalism, because you had a socialist run from top down, but at the grassroots level, you were still allowed to trade your own goods, particularly if they weren't that essential. And just to that person who says that the car of the people in most socialist nations was a single model that was terrible. Well, actually, if we look at quite a lot of the car models made in the United States, well into the 80s and 90s, they weren't actually very good at all. They were and even in the 50s,
death traps as well.
Well, yeah, and even in the 50s, the gas guzzlers were terribly inefficient. I mean, I've been on one in Cuba, ironically a communist country that still uses them because of the embargo. But like, if you're telling me that was a safe, efficient, reliable car, that's nonsense. Yeah, I know it was an old car, to be fair. It was old and it kept going because they're quite good at adapting and adapting and repairing it. They've had to learn how to do so. But the point is, it depends what you mean by good. It was not efficient. It was no more efficient than any Soviet model, probably.
And let's not forget, the car has contributed to destroying the planet because the technology of electric engines and batteries was repressed by the old capitalist companies.
And actually, since more privatization of our own infrastructure, like the trains, NHS to a lesser extent, British Airways. In fact, Britain's car industry has declined to a large extent. it's actually declined very much. And there was actually a lot back in the day. There was, when governments had a bit more control over the economy, there were a lot more car companies actually in the world, and now there are just a few monopolizers.
I mean, this is a one-word comment in response to your support for Tesla. I've supported Tesla. I'm not 100% sure if it's perfect, but this one-word comment, lithium, maybe it means like we've got a lot of dangerous, limited, and poisonous ingredients to these batteries, and they're not easily recyclable. And will it necessarily solve the problem? What do you feel about that?
Well,
Dust, especially
lithium is a common material. All metals are poisons.
Yeah, and it does.
Don't eat batteries. I think that's the recommendation.
Yeah, it can cause.
And you can recycle easily once an object exists. Once it's been mined, unlike oil engines, which would burn something like lithium,
irreversibly,
the equivalent of lithium. It burns it, means we have to breathe it in and die from that. Because as I just said, all metals are poisons. Oil industry burns, you can't recycle that. But a battery, you don't need to mine it once you've developed it, which is why mining companies really hate Tesla, because they can get themselves out of business.
But CO2 is not irreversibly. I mean, it gets reused by plants and goes back into the ecosystem.
Yeah, but the oil itself, the fuel itself, cannot be reused once it's been burned.
That's true. Point. No, I agree. I see. I understand your point.
That's I think what Dust was getting at. I think that's what he was alluding to.
Oh, and just one more crucial point. Yeah, we've not to talk about public transport, which would dramatically cut oil use and pollution. I don't know if we have time. We probably don't have time for that. But we should talk about that next time.
I'll maybe we just do one more. Sorry, go on. You say what were you going to say?
Have destroyed public transport and made communities poorer and polluted because that one act.
Yeah, so I'm going to go to two more, which kind of seem to be around. Let me see. Are they both about? Okay, fine. Okay, so I'll just do one which seems to be centered more around, I've just clicked on it at the moment, centered more around CO2 and all this kind of stuff. So socialism is not a solution of climate change, and in and of itself, the steps to improve are a separate thing. We can see the former socialist nations like the USSR did fail to address the ecological problem. Go, Josh. I feel like you're ready to go.
Yeah, well, actually, on the one hand, actually, the one thing that was very rare in the Soviet Union was poaching, and that is obviously an environmental threat and definitely a contributor to climate, both a product and a cause of climate change. Okay, and arguably capitalism. It was very uncommon in the Soviet Union, and since the collapse of
poaching,
USSR,
as in killing animals illegally.
And also to a lesser extent illegal logging, but now it is a really big problem in Russia, in the Russian Federation of today, in 21st century, like 1990s / post-Soviet capitalist 1990s, early 21st century Russia. It is a really big problem, we can, because there's just, there is just such a collapse there has been such a vast collapse of law and order in those socialist in the parts of Siberia. In fact, when I have seen crime. I mean, I know I'm again digressing slightly, but when I see crime statistics in Eastern Russia, like how many illegal activities in general are going on. It's totally unregulated and unreported, and it's not quite lawless like it was in the 90s, but I mean, the idea that that part of the world is getting better. Particularly, there was a recent oil spill actually in Eastern Russia, which was really bad, especially terrible, especially horrific. Yes, it did happen also in the Soviet era, but there was one that was especially terrible, and it only happened just 2 or 3 years back. I mean, that was an ecological disaster. Anyone who tells you that the capitalist Russia of today is doing better at fighting climate change, and particularly when it's a country that's warming 2.5 times faster than much of the rest of the world because of a lot of the methane and other gases trapped in the ice, Siberian permafrost is melting. The idea that social, I'm not saying it's all because socialism collapsed, but the idea that it's getting better in capitalist Russia is nonsense.
I think what he was saying is that, well, I think the point in the comment was that socialist Russia didn't solve the problem either. But maybe
No,
you're
no,
saying
no.
it just used less resources and more responsibly.
No,
in a more...
I wouldn't even say it necessarily used less resources in general. I'm not even saying it was more efficient. I'm simply saying that capitalism did not solve the problem, and that the Soviet Union did at least have at least a couple of significant ecological, virtues, or what's the word?
Which is it managed the resources better? Is that what the virtue was?
No, no.
You
I just think
poaching
it was better at controlling illegal poaching and illegal timber. It was much better at that.
So I think you're agreeing that it managed the resources or controlled the resources in a better way. In some ways, controlled it, less exploitation or something.
It stopped exploitation from going the way, getting absolutely manic, like it is today.
Yeah. But
I wouldn't say it was that careful at handling them.
Yeah, I would agree. I think we have to be careful about saying one is better than the other necessarily. Okay, cool. And I don't know, maybe I'll just go to the last comment, and then it's more about socialism, communism. And I think I find it quite a balanced comment. I actually like the idea of communism and socialism, as I do in many ways, right? There's some good things about it. As a species, we're not yet capable of it for many reasons. We are corrupt. We're too corrupt. I agree with that. I hope we can achieve it in the future. So I think that's a very balanced and thoughtful way of approaching it, rather than the idea that we can just jump into this utopia and everything will be wonderful. I think that's not going to be helpful for a better world. Go on.
Do you want me to say something, Dustin?
Both of you. Go on.
Okay, well, I would say that nobody is infallible. We've all done things wrong in the past, some worse than others. But I think that this is the kind of like the point, and I think this is, and again, I'm digressing a bit but just using an analogy, it's like our justice system. It doesn't allow offenders to reform very well because they've done something wrong in the past. It means they can never be better. I mean, I'd agree that in certain cases there are certain individuals who have done things that are so horrific and unforgivable that there's no way back for them. I don't necessarily believe in redemption for everybody, but the thing is, people like that are very cynical, can be very cynical and say, well, because you or I or other people have done something wrong or have been wrong in the past, it means we can't ever fix it. We can't ever make amends. We can't ever move on from it. We can't ever atone for it. We present ourselves as being so unforgiving both to others and to ourselves. And I think that's just so regressive and retrograde, and it makes us almost reprobate as the offenders and the corrupt people that we keep lambasting. Agreed that humanity has sinned in the past and it will continue to do so for some time, but it doesn't mean to say we can't get better. It's a bit like saying that because a child was children were cruel to each other in the playground, it means that we must be like that as adults, or it's just
the way we get
so immature,
and the way we get from the childhood-like state to the adult state is actually having laws that are international, meaning that when a crime does happen, a legal response can happen to that crime. If you don't have that, then you do have constant capitalists or whoever you are taking over and exploiting that vacuum of legal presence, meaning war, horror, poverty, rape can always and will always happen. Now that's why the majority of the community, which is what this whole we started originally, community being communism, that's where the word comes from. And you're accused of being a communist if you say, I believe in law. That means psychopaths no longer have the right to roam the earth.
Of course, they are largely in control of it, unfortunately.
And the psychopaths are in control through Abrahamic religions, through capitalism.
Okay, well, I mean, if somebody wants to round up, I'll round up in one way and you can round up into different ways. But first of all, thank you, Josh, for being here. It's just like different ideas. And I think you're very reasoned, and it'll be great to, I know you're in Dust's place, but hopefully he'll keep welcoming you back. Thank you for being here. I always, like I said in the beginning of the first stream, there's a rare few people who have thought about their ideas hard enough to be able to put them out in public on video. Most people, I used to do live streams and I used to struggle before I got to Speaker's Corner. I used to struggle to find people who are really convinced about their beliefs enough to say them out in public and have them as a permanent record on video. So that just says that you're a very thoughtful person, as you are, Dust, as well. So I appreciate all your time. And the fact that we're disagreeing is not a bad thing.
Sorry, I was late again.
Oh, it's okay. Hopefully we'll see you for both streams next time. But that the fact that we're disagreeing is not a bad thing. In fact, it adds value in many ways to the video, because we're all each representing different factions or parts of society, and those parts of society don't generally talk, don't intellectually engage each other and test each other's ideas out and develop hopefully better, or develop their own ideas better. So this is all very important. I think people don't understand that ideas are where all action comes from. You know, most people absorb ideas subconsciously and just follow the ideas given to us from above somewhere or whatever, and do continue the status quo, and sometimes status quo is not so good. So anyway, those are my brief roundup thoughts. Thank you very much, Josh and Dust, for being here. Who wants to say something else to finish off?
No, I think we've more or less touched all the right bases, you know. Yeah, for the time being anyway. We don't want to exhaust our ideas for next time.
But I'd just like to say it's been absolutely a delight to have Josh here.
Apologies for being late. Apologies for being late again. Sorry.
A little late, but nevertheless very well appreciated.
No, thank you.
Yes.
And Khalid, you're a gentleman, you're a thinker, a scholar, and it's always a pleasure to be interacting with you on this sort of internet, sort of speedy, streamy, sciencey communications that we have now, thanks to universities, which are government funded, of course. And on that note, the dust has now settled.
Cool. And I just want to say thank you for all the people on the live stream. They both joined both streams, really active, really thoughtful ideas, really brought value to the stream. So thank you, everybody who's been watching and taking part.
Thank you, you people out there. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. I'll end the stream there.